Yes, friends, you know it, on a Friday, because that's Thursday Night Football, and that's the way it goes. I'm Adam Armick, your host here on OGP, One Giant Podcast, also covering the Brooklyn Nets for the Locked On Nets podcast, joined not only by the healthy, wealthy, and wise generational season ticket holder Andy Makowitz, but also returning member to the panel. I should have put you behind some type of guest curtain. It's Locked On ACC and fellow Giants fan in misery, Candace Cooper. Welcome to you both.
Guys, thank you for having me yet again. It's so fun to be back. Unfortunately, under these circumstances, I thought we were going to be, really excited, but it is what it is. I'm happy to see you guys.
Was there last night? Their game what happened?
I don't know if you blacked out, Andy. There could have been some action last night. Listen, we come in following the 30-29 loss. We're going to keep this as game focused, I think, for our time with Candace. Andy and I will dive in a little bit more on some of the macro things that maybe we feel about this team and roster construction, that type of stuff. But let's start at the end where, and this is why you bring Candace back in, because it's a last-second field goal opportunity. Dexter Lawrence ends up hopping off sides. The miss gets turned into a closer attempt and a field goal. Washington walks off with the victory. The biggest problem I think you have with this particular moment is that, as you heard all former players say, what Dexter Lawrence is trying to accomplish is move the line of scrimmage a little bit and allow a linebacker in behind him to be able to get his jumping off point a little bit closer to the kicker, maybe affect the kick on the attempt there. However, more often than not, you have zero impact when you're playing over the snap as a special teams player on a field goal attempt. And I said this on one of our other videos responding to a fan where we said that Dexter Lawrence had to step up. I think clarifying that for him of step up, not over the line of scrimmage, may have been an apt communication. Candace, I mean, obviously, this is what you anticipated.
Let's start here. If Coach Judge is supposed to be someone who comes from the special teams, he is the guy when it comes to special teams. To lose on essentially a special teams-esque type play, it's like you almost got too smart for your own good, try to outwit yourself, try to be like, hey, Dexter, do this. Like, who knows what could have happened, what kind of conversation went on. But, overall, I said Dexter Lawrence is going to be the key to stepping up this season. And this is not what I meant. I feel as if the Giants always put themselves in places to be successful and then somehow just trip over their own feet. Daniel Jones, last night he ran for a touchdown, didn't trip this time, and yet he was like, oh, wait, it's okay. It's fine. The whole team is going to do it for me in the end. So it's just it's another game where, yes, there are absolutely positives, but when we're talking about defense, putting up, 57 in 2 games now, we're talking about offense who Saquon Barkley, I don't know what it is. We got to get out of our head, big guy. But overall, I'm just like, I went to sleep. I'm not going to hold you. Didn't watch every single play because I woke up, I saw 23-17, and I said, yeah, they're not going to – it's too close. Giants can't handle too close. They have to dominate or they have to be out of it. It's just they don't know how to be in tough games and close it. And what was the 2 little stats? Daniel Jones has never won in primetime. He's also never lost to the Washington football team. One was going to go, and unfortunately it was the Washington football team domination.
Any time that, and this happens, right? Anytime that they give you those stats of like Daniel Jones has never lost doing this, the Giants have never won. Anytime there's a never involved in any statement, you're always like, so that's the end of that streak, obviously.
Right.
Like, there's no way that holds up. Andy, on the Dexter Lawrence piece, and I'll even tie it into what Candace said about Joe Judge and just this team specifically last night. Dexter Lawrence has that penalty. Anyone can slice it how they want to. That's not I know when it's the last play, you want to say that's why you lost. And we saw him miss the field goal, so we can all look at that. There's a myriad of other things that happened throughout this game. But he commits that penalty, 11 total penalties for the New York Football Giants. Like, this was not a disciplined game. And I think that that's probably something that jumps out there too. When you look at the penalties and combined with, I'll say, Dexter Lawrence's performance overall, since we're on him, did he give you enough throughout the rest of the game that you could overlook a mistake like that? Or would this kind of feel like, boy, you weren't checking the box throughout the game and then you double down with this unfortunate play at the end?
Look, we're going to highlight Dexter Lawrence because he did jump offside, and they get to re-kick the field goal. If the field goal would have gone through the uprights before he jumped offside, we wouldn't even be necessarily having this discussion, right? I think we're putting too much stock in a guy trying to make a play on a 48-yard field goal when, like, chances are that guy's going to make the kick, right? There's a better than 50% chance. It's a 48-yarder. It's not a 57-yarder, and he's like trying to get in there to block it. We're talking about an under 50-yard field goal for a guy of Dustin Hopkins, who has a long of 56 yards. Like the guy can absolutely drill it from everywhere. I think everyone's making too big of a deal of the Dexter Lawrence play because it was the last play of the game. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, because of that, we're like, well, now let's go dive into Dexter Lawrence more. Let's look at every snap by snap. Was he giving the right performance? Because it's such a New York Giant thing to do, to pile on a guy when you wouldn't have even spoken his name if like the last offsides play didn't happen. We wouldn't be dissecting every single snap that he had. And to me, and we'll get it, and we'll probably get into some of the different game by drive by drive types of things. The biggest drive for me again was the last drive before halftime for the Washington football team. It happened against the Denver Broncos, right? They get the ball with 2 minutes and 20 seconds to go in Denver territory, and the Broncos march down the entire field when the Giants have a lead. All the Giants have to do is give up a field goal, bend, don't break, and you go into the halftime with a lead. The Giants did the exact same thing against the Washington football team. Gave them the ball, 2 minutes left. They do a 2-minute drill. They run down the field. If the Giants bend, don't break, and hold them to a field goal, they go into halftime with a lead again. Like it's nonsensical to me that like we're focusing on the last play, but the defense in clutch situations is just giving up these touchdowns when we need to be able to make a stop if Patrick Graham's defense is as good as we think it is.
Well, I want to know, do you feel like that's more reason why we should speak about Dexter Lawrence? Because he should be the Leonard Williams of the world. He should. I mean, the fact that I'm talking about Blake Martinez over him, like we put so much stock in Dexter Lawrence being the man, like the plays that we want to be happy about for you, we can't even enjoy, right? We can't even enjoy them because we're so used to you failing us.
Well, Candace, that's a good point. What I would say is we're focusing on Dexter Lawrence because he made the offside play. Right. I think you got to look across the defensive line at Leonard Williams, he's the only one making $20 million a year on that entire defense. And yet he had 2 hurries last night. That's all that he contributed. So when you think about it, it's like if Leonard Williams was the one that jumped offside, there would be far more scrutiny about Leonard Williams because he's making so much money. He hasn't gotten the pressure. He hasn't made the impact that Giant fans expect. So for me, I think it was a good call out, Candace, about Dexter Lawrence. He has to play better. He hasn't, but also he's not the guy making $20 million that's supposed to be the anchor of this defense. He's still learning and emerging as one of these players. Leonard Williams, to me, is the bigger concern. It's like, hey, Big Cat, you got to get in there and shake things up. You missed a sack that could have taken him out of field goal range. You didn't get that one. There's bigger fish to fry for me on the defensive side of the ball than Dexter Lawrence.
There's a whole lot of fish.
But you're talking about this line though. Leonard Williams likes to do a lot of fishing in the offseason. Cross my mind.
He does.
We're talking about the defense though, and you talk about players that make a lot of money. Is it last night's game again? This will cross over a little bit because Adoree Jackson, I thought, was playing a better game in week 2 than he had in week 1, right up until he gives up the touchdown in the end zone. By the way, Andy, remember just before halftime, what did Washington do? They bent but didn't break and held the Giants to a field goal, right? So they did the thing that you want them to do. Then they go down and get the touchdown. Could have at least been a tie game going into the break. Adoree Jackson had a better game, still has that one mistake. Bradbury, on the other hand, and I'm going to cross this over with what happened on the other side of the ball here, because this is all going to fall into this big swath. A lot of people on Twitter were kind of clapping back at the idea of you don't know what Gallaudet was saying to Daniel Jones in that moment on the sideline. Listen, happens between players. I'm not going to overemphasize it. What I will point to is Bradbury struggled mightily. Had, you look at what McLaurin did to him, over 100 yards, I think 9 catches, had the touchdown. On the flip side of it, so he's supposed to be locking him down. That's the idea of having Bradbury. That didn't seem to pan out. And then on the flip side, like, you can say whatever you want. You caught 3 out of 8 targets, Kenny Gallaudet. Like, you are the number 1 stud wide receiver for this team. You weren't getting the job done. And I know you can say, you got to feed me more, but you caught less than 50% of your targets. Everyone's going to look at Darius Slayton and say, well, he dropped that big bomb. Right. He also caught a touchdown pass down the left side. He caught 50% of his passes. Sterling Shepard went for another 100 yards. Does anyone know that Sterling Shepard's on pace for 136 catches this year and 1,800 yards? Just let that simmer inside of your brain as we worry about, what the opportunity is going to be for a wide receiving core.
So Adam,
what bothers? It's fine. You can start, Andy. But what bothers you most? Does it bother you that Daniel Jones had a really good game and Kenny Gallaudet wasn't as big a part of that? Obviously, he opens things up for other receivers. Are you upset that Bradbury is supposed to be the lockdown guy and seemed to find himself trailing McLaurin all over the field? Or is it that Patrick Graham sets up and says, we're going to go man-to-man shell defense, and takes him 2.5 to 3 quarters so far each of the first 2 weeks to figure out that something has to look different?
So first and foremost, let's just make sure that everyone has what happened with Kenny Gallaudet correct. Let's not misconstrue this. Kenny Gallaudet was not yelling at Daniel Jones. And Twitter wants to make it seem like they have a beef, like he's like, get me the ball. What you don't see is one of the players is actually blocking Jason Garrett, who's sitting on the bench, and Kenny Gallaudet is like, call more plays for me to get the ball. He's not looking at Daniel Jones saying, you two throw me the ball. So like, I think it's different, and maybe this is just a little nuanced thing for me, but it's different. Like a player yelling at a coach to say, I want the ball more, is completely different than yelling at his quarterback like, you're not doing what I need you to do.
Oh, I don't care. Though. That's fine. Like, that's not about Daniel Jones and that beef. Like, I'm like, Kenny Gallaudet, like, dude, catch 7 out of 8 balls and then say you want it more. Don't catch 3 out of 8, man. Like, there was a handful of balls that hit him in the hands. Like, there was one over the middle. There's one out on the sidelines. Like, I like what he's done, and he's going to be good, and they're going to light it up this year. But this is a footnote to this whole thing. But it's just like, same thing with Odell. It goes back to like when you have an elite wide receiver, when you have an OBJ, unless they're getting fed the way they want, whether it's a coach, whether it's another player, whatever it is, they're not as concerned. And maybe Kenny Gallaudet is gassed up about wanting to win the game and thinks that he gives them the best chance. But if your best efforts afford Sterling Shepard to have the performance he does, and you're putting up points, hang your hat on that. Like, you know what I mean? That's it. I don't want to belabor it, but it's just,
to me, it's not a big deal at all. I want my players passionate on the sideline. I want them saying like, I want to win the game. Get me the ball. I'm your guy. Like yelling at the offensive coordinator to call plays. Yeah, fine. I want him to catch the ball too. I have no problems with that. But to be honest with you, Candace, I think the thing that Adam was touching on a little bit is this James Bradbury thing. You know, Adam and I talked about it in the post-game show of like, you know, he got burned quite a bit. You know, 6 out of 7 of the passes that were thrown in his direction last game were completed. This game, Terry McLaurin had him in the spin cycle. And if it wasn't for, you know, that play with a few minutes to go where he comes up huge and jumps around and intercepts the ball to give back to the Giants, you might be talking more about him than we are Dexter Lawrence.
I think we're having an Eli Apple flashback and everyone's just like, please, not again. Like, let's just not make the same mistake twice. But no, I do agree. I think, though, that he's shown that he could be a leader on this defense, and he has proven last season there was a little bit of life. But I agree. I think there's times where we should talk more about how McLaurin is elite and probably had one hell of a game. He's having one hell of a season than it is Bradbury just having an off night and like him sucking. I think it's more so McLaurin is just, hey, if you can do anything with any quarter, like he's had 10 quarterbacks since he started this thing. And the fact that he's still delivered in the way he has, that says more to him than I think it does about Bradbury. But in the same vein, it's hard to have like, oh, we have Bradbury and Jackson in our back. Like, we're good. Like, we feel good about that. I don't necessarily have that same confidence. But if defense is supposed to be the thing we hang our hat on, we're in trouble as Giants fans. We're in trouble going into the rest of this season. And I think offensively, Daniel can only do so much. The fact that he is trying to lead in rushing, that should also be a problem. We should also be concerned. We should be upset that Daniel Jones is going to be that guy for us, because I don't think that should be the case. But I would love to know y'all's thoughts, rounding out about this offense. Saquon Barkley, do you feel like he's scared? Do you feel like his rushing is going to be for what it once was?
I think he's still timid. I just don't think he's 100% back. I mean, Andy, he said if he's ready to go, then he goes full boat. 10 carries week 1, 10 carries week 2. Like, they do have him on a pitch count. Like, they clearly are holding him back. You saw the explosive play from him though, right? Like listen, it feels like this is what's funny about last night. There's so many ups and downs and ebbs and flows to this game that we forget about the fact that Nick Gates suffers an absolutely brutal injury after being taken from center, moved to left guard. You put in Price, and the offensive line looks respectable. I think what's different this year from last year is not only getting Saquon Barkley back, but also this mentality from the offensive side of the ball of saying, yeah, we can be rushing dominant and still lose games by double digits because it's just not enough because you can't get enough explosive plays out of it. Or we can try to scheme our ways to have a little bit more passing success. You see the way they're using Daniel Jones, getting him out in space, let him use his legs as well. So I'm not going to react yet to Saquon Barkley. I don't know if I'll react to Saquon Barkley until week 5 or 6, if I'm honest, because somebody said on the pregame, a former player, That when you're running, coming off that injury, you literally hear pops and cracks from like the cartilage. And like, I can't imagine what that must feel like as you go to plant your foot and drive. So I'm sure there is elements to this for Saquon where it's just like, yeah, I'm ready. But he even said leading up to in the week, he was like, yeah, it's not ideal to turn around on a short week, you know, as you're coming off this injury, but I'm going to be out there. I'm going to give it everything. He hit one home run play. I think that the Giants, maybe you look at Booker, he looks okay. Brightwell's not going to get a chance here yet. It doesn't seem like, so it just, this kind of gets to my theme about the game in general. Like, is that overall, like the defense is the biggest concern here for me. Like, what does this look like? If Dexter Lawrence and Leonard Williams aren't getting after the quarterback, then the best corners in the world they can't hold up for 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds, even against a guy like Heineke. But there's a ton of positives on the offense. And I just keep looking at all the things you don't have. And my biggest question is like, what does the shuffled offensive line look like next week now? Like, because this is going to be a never-ending story for the Giants all year at this point.
Yeah.
Well, Adam, there's a lot there's tons to take away from this game. Obviously, the first thing that I will say is early on, the Giants get the ball, and I was at the bar watching it with a friend, and like as the Giants are marching on the field, I'm looking left and I'm looking right. I'm like, is anyone else watching this? Like, this is a completely different team than I saw. Like, they're creative. They're doing naked bootlegs for Daniel Jones. They went no huddle, which is what I was begging in the post game of last game. Like, Daniel Jones is better when he doesn't have to think and he can just make plays, right? Like, that's, to me, it's like you give him way too much time. He's too cerebral. He's like, well, what if the safety comes in? What if this happens? It's like, just go no huddle, look at what's in front of you, and take what the defense gives you. That first drive was everything that Giant fans were asking for. Daniel Jones was getting out in space. They were using his legs. You know, Saquon Barkley wasn't necessarily in the mix yet, so having him, be able to run. It also stopped the pass rush of the Washington football team, right? Like, the threat of him getting outside and moving around meant that the edge had to kind of stay there for half a second anytime he dropped back, as opposed to just pinning their ears back and running. And like, when the Giants are 7-0, I'm like, if we see this offense all season, like check a box. And the reason why I say that is because, to your point, Adam, Nick Gates has a terrible injury. We are not talking about the offensive line. There's not a single person this morning that wakes up and is like, that offensive line, let me tell you, it didn't show up. It's like, we're not saying a peep other than the Nick Gates injury, because they held 2 elite pass rushers in Montez Sweat and Chase Young and gave Daniel Jones enough time to look incredible. This is his highest Pro Football Focus grade ever as a starting quarterback for the Giants, ever. And like, to me, it's insane for people to wake up this morning and think anything other than like the fans, the media, and everyone that critiqued Jason Garrett. He heard everything that people were saying. There is no doubt in my mind. He doesn't go from the most conservative play caller and then just wake up the next day and be like, I'm going to be a different guy because I feel like it. It's like, no, you're going to get fired if you don't use your offensive weapons the way you're supposed to. Right, Candace? Like, I'm not crazy about this.
No, listen, Daniel Jones is the king of study long, study wrong. Every time I would count to 3, like 1, 2. It's going to be great. But like the infamous freshman we got going on here, or rookie, Kadarius Toney said, I mean, we're not mad. It's just kind of lame. Like, I'm not mad at the Giants. It's just kind of lame for real. Like,
all right. Well, knowing that this is your day off, we won't keep you too much longer here, Candace. But so they're coming out of it, because I mean, you touched on him, so maybe I'll ask the question. But just overall, do you come out of this game as typical Giants as it was? Do you come out of this feeling like, all right, like this is a team that is moving in a little bit of a better direction, that they are trying to slowly evolve this offense, that by the end of the year, wins and losses matter, but by the end of the year, we'll feel more confident about more positions than not? Or do you think that this 0-2 start is just like every other year, that we're going to be down the road? It's whatever week, they're going to be 4 or 5 games below 500, and we're going to be much closer to this tear down rebuild than we maybe anticipated? Because I look at it as we're getting closer to checking certain boxes, like franchise quarterback. Like, maybe we're getting closer to checking that. And if he can keep doing those types of things, that might be the most important sign you can get on a week-to-week basis.
Are you asking me? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, yeah. Let's go with you. I mean, I know what Andy's going to say.
No, it's all good.
Did I direct it at anyone, or was I just
I don't remember.
out into space? God, good Lord.
You were like, you were reading off the teleprompter like, I'm Ron Burgundy with a question mark, and we're like, I don't know. He'll read whatever we put up there, guys.
You can't type it up like that for me.
No, listen.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on like, this is overreaction Friday. And so like the pendulum swings, like, there was all doom and gloom after the Broncos game. This one, I feel like fans are more angry than they are like upset with the direction of the team. But tell me what you think, the long-term prognosis is. Has any of it changed with what happened yesterday?
No, I think we'll get 5 wins at best, and that's fine by me. I think this is going to be the NFC least. It's still the same. I think, the fact that we get 1 win at a division per week, we can just hold our hands of that. So we're lucky to be in this division. So the bar is in hell. So we can't really go much worse. But I think with the Denver loss, everyone saw glimpses. We were a little bit optimistic, but with this loss, knowing what Daniel Jones does, like he lights up against the Washington football team. So everyone was expecting him to play well, right? But when you lose and know how you lose, it's kind of just very on brand for where we're at as a team. So again, 5 wins at best. I will be pleasantly surprised if we're even close at second in this division when it's all said and done.
I'm going to I'll let Candace get out of here because unfortunately I cannot help but be hopeful, and I don't want her to hear the take that I have later in the episode. Simple yes or no on this one. Just by the way the defense has played the first 2 weeks, did the Giants make a mistake drafting Kadarius Toney at 20 as opposed to an Oweh, as opposed to a Joe Tryon, maybe a reach at 20, but just realizing, hey, pressuring the quarterback helps a lot of other things?
Yes, because if you felt like you were going to get Kenny Gallaudet in the offseason, or if you even knew that was an itch, you probably should have gone defensively. So absolutely. I don't want to waste my guy's time. Like, he can go flourish somewhere else.
That's it. I love it. We love Candace Cooper. Follow her on Locked On ACC. Go enjoy I don't know what the weather's like there. It's terrible here, but hopefully enjoy the time off the rest of your day. We appreciate it as always, Candace.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate you.
All right. After I kick you out and bring you back in, Andy. I wanted to make sure that we got Candace in because she was available. I threw it out there and she hopped on. It was awesome. Here's the other thing though. I want to cover just a little bit quickly here because Joseph Clark has been in on the live stream here. I like it, man. Like he's saying, feels a lot better about the offense, after this game. You have to hopefully stay healthy when it comes to what the Giants are doing on that offensive line and what they can do. And then of course the concerns around the defensive side of the ball and what we've seen so far. There's a couple of things that I want to roll through here quickly. Everyone's jumping on Darius Slayton. I'm going to reiterate that he's a 5th round pick. I'm going to reiterate that like he's a 50-50 ball kind of guy. And yes, he should have laid out as far as getting that touchdown pass. Beautiful pass from Daniel Jones. You can say Daniel could have put it even more perfectly on his hands. You just got to get out for that one and grab it. But you had the touchdown earlier in the game. This can be very quick side note here. Are people like, is it just Giants fans looking to blame? Like they're like, well, I'm going to blame Darius Slayton because it's a touchdown pass. He dropped it, but like that, there it is. Like that's the guy.
Well, Adam, you're hitting the nail on the head because when a team loses in the fashion that the Giants did, where you're like, we played well enough to win, everyone wants the scapegoat and everyone wants it to be one thing, whether it's Daniel Jones should have thrown it better to Darius Slayton, whether Dexter Lawrence shouldn't have jumped off sides, whether James Bradbury should be playing better, whether Saquon Barkley needs to look at, like everyone wants to pick the one thing that lost the game. In reality, it's not one thing. If any of those things go correct, any one of them, the Giants win the game. If the Giants hold them in the last possession of the first half, they win the game. If Dexter Lawrence doesn't jump off sides, they win the game. If Darius Slayton catches that touchdown pass, they win the game. These are like
any of those called with that holding penalty on the Daniel Jones touchdown run, right? Right. If the offensive line doesn't get back-to-back false start penalties, one on Nate Solder, one on Andrew Thomas, that moves them back. Daniel Jones runs for a little bit of yardage, but ends up having to settle for a field goal. And this is kind of what I mean by, right? We started the show with Dexter Lawrence jumps off sides, field goal. Like I get it. And some of these things are like, they said it on the broadcast, that holding penalty on CJ Board was like, borderline at best, but those plays happen every single week for every single team. So we're not going to sit here and say, because of that, here's what went wrong. I just think that there were these ups and downs, the big part that we spoke about. And this is where I want to go a little bit macro with this, I think, and talk about the rest of the season. Cause I still have a bold prediction. I still feel good. I still feel good about this team. Like I still think that they're progressing in a nice way. Biggest concern being the health of the offensive line. The penalties are a problem. Like you're supposed to be a clean team. So having that many penalties is terrible. If you get half of those penalties in this game, you probably end up winning it just on that alone. Jason Garrett, like you said, I think last night was the example of here's a guy that wants to open it up more, but also knows it's a tentative balance doing that thing. So you're starting to see that inch forward a little bit more. And then there's Patrick Graham. Is he staying too long with this philosophy, right? Like they run the shell defense. They keep everything in front of them. Second week in a row that the opposing quarterback has had a phenomenal completion percentage, and it's okay to take the little paper cuts, right? But it was a lot easier last week when the Giants get a garbage touchdown to lose 27-13 and say, all right, the defense, but what were you doing? Now here in this one, like you scored 5 field goals, probably a couple too many there, but you put up almost 30 points. Like that's supposed to be enough with this defense, and they just don't seem to have any ability to step in and really get the job done, especially on some short yardage plays too. Like they were not moving that line of scrimmage at the point of attack throughout this game.
Adam, there again, it comes down to everyone wants one thing to like just because it's easy in your mind. You're like, if that thing was different, we would have won the game. There are so many stats that we could look at that we could point to and say that's the reason why the Giants didn't win the game. I'll give you a prime example. The Washington football team was 3 out of 4 in red zone touchdowns. Yep. So when they got down there, they scored touchdowns. The red zone defense was terrible. It was not good. And then when you look at the Giants, they were 1 out of 3 in the red zone. They didn't convert more often than not. That wasn't good. You look at James Bradbury making the interception, in the fourth quarter to give the Giants the ball. If the Giants can pick up 1 first down on offense, the game is basically over and they salt it away. There's all these critical moments and critical stats that, like, if we just change one of them, they win. And the Giants had the time of possession. The Giants won the turnover battle. Like, every single stat and metric you look at, if you just looked at it in the box score, you'd be like, the Giants won this game.
Do you that particular play? Because let's just touch on that briefly here, because there are these handful of plays that that ring out in your mind, including, by the way, the sideline throw to Darius Slayton. It's Daniel Jones rolling out. He's on the run. Again, people want to beat up Darius Slayton there, and I said, listen, put it in his numbers. He can plant his feet and bring that in. But that's a little bit of a footnote. After the interception by Bradbury, this is something that I think. So there's a couple of things that I want to do throughout this season. I marked down every single, like all the key players' PFF grades. We often use them as a reference and say, hey, you take it with a drop of hat. Listen, I'm not doing the legwork to study the film on these guys, so I'm going to use it as a reference point and track how do guys rise and fall on a week-to-week basis. It'll be interesting to see how some of these players grade out, because when you get into that spot, do you think, we always say, well, Jason Garrett not opening it up enough. But a lot of times, and I can't remember who was on ESPN radio this morning, said, throughout a game, you have these plays and you go, we think we can get 4 or 5 yards on this particular, say, running play. And then you get 6 yards and 7 yards like a few times a game. You go, okay, put that in our back pocket. We can go back to that. After the turnover, run, and then the pass attempt. And it's that thing where when Saquon only gets a yard, gets hit at the line of scrimmage, you go, oh, here it is, going back into this conservative play calling. But theoretically, you're tapping into a play that you think is going to be explosive there. You don't get it the first time, you try again. What was your takeaway on that sequence? Do you think that this is like, Jason, just stick with what you know, open it up, grip it and rip it? Or it's just circumstantial that you had it in your mind what you were going to accomplish there? And and an extra caveat, do you think it was Jason Garrett looking over at Joe Judge saying, we have a field goal, don't be too risky here, and kind of needing to take the scope of the game and say, yeah, but our defense is not getting the job done. A touchdown here, a first down here really moves the needle for us being able to win this game. Could have made that, I think would have been a 9 or 10 point game if they had been able to convert a touchdown there.
So it frustrates me because it felt like we were reverting back to conservative play calling. Look, we knew that Saquon Barkley wasn't looking great. He had that 41-yard run, but he had 12 other carries that amounted to like 12 yards. So he wasn't moving the ball other than that one big break. Yeah. And it just felt like you're already in field goal range and you're being ultra conservative. You're trying not to lose the game instead of going and trying to win the game. And Daniel Jones had shown you throughout the entire game, put it in his hands, allow him to make a play, let him get out in space, let him make the decision. And it seems like Jason Garrett was like, no, I'm going to take his decision-making out of this, and I'm going to try to run the ball, hopefully get a few yards here and salt away the game, when you could have been like, and I know this is a ridiculous example, Adam, but it's like, do they take that out of Patrick Mahomes' hands? Do they just run it into the line a bunch of times and hope that kicking a field goal and playing defense is going to win? No, they're like, I'm going to give it to Mahomes, and we're going to let him figure it out, and we're going to go win this game. And I am not comparing Daniel Jones to Patrick Mahomes in any regard, other than the fact they play the same position. right?
No, but it's your quarterback's hands, right? Your quarterback is the guy, and you based on the game, right? Your quarterback's having a good game. Trust him. I'll even say, I wonder if that's the spot where you saw Booker just get a couple of carries in this game, but you can see what he is, a very slow, plodding, drag you forward for a handful of yards. Maybe it would have been more effective to use him or Eli Penny. They used him a couple of short yardage gains. Maybe that could have been an effective option. So just something to think about. But let's go macro here, because again, Joe Clark over on the YouTube conversation brings up the idea of the one thing that he was worried about was losing Dalvin Tomlinson. This is the macro piece of this to me. When we talk about the offseason, we won't spend too much time on it, and we'll round out the loss and we'll reset ourselves for next week. But in the offseason, there's this weird mechanism of how things happened. You hadn't quite re-signed Leonard Williams yet, so you weren't able to shuffle some numbers and create a little bit more cap space for yourself to go pursue other players. That's the only reason, in theory, why Tomlinson couldn't get brought back. He didn't sign a massive contract. Then you work the numbers, it opens up, and you go get a Dory Jackson. Just from that bird's eye view, do you maybe just back of your mind go, okay, Dave Gettleman, we may like the players you brought in, but also, it's like what we talked about with Candace. If you knew you're getting Kenny, why are you drafting Tony? Right? Like there's something here where it feels like you want to always be trying to check a box at every position of need and then rotate your way through. It doesn't always work perfectly, but the fact that they signed a number 1 wide receiver and drafted a first-round receiver, the fact that they had James Bradbury, and we can debate about what we've seen so far, but then signed a Dory Jackson, right? Like, these other areas of need. Do you think back to that at all now through 2 weeks and say, is Austin Johnson and Danny Shelton a good enough comp? And was getting rid of BJ Hill the right decision to make for what maybe his value was in this particular season?
Okay, so I want to be clear about this. We all wanted Dalvin Tomlinson back if we could make it happen. I think all fans did. We were all excited for it. Like, I know it's only been one game, it's only been one game since he's been gone, but let's not forget what type of role Dalvin Tomlinson had on this team. Like, yes, he was a heart and soul guy, but when you look at the stats, Adam, he was here for 4 years and he had 8 total sacks, right? Like, he had 3.5 sacks last year.
A different role, and we know that.
Sure, but the biggest knock on the defense is that we're not getting pressure on the quarterback right now. Signing Dalvin Tomlinson to a long-term deal wouldn't have solved that problem. Right? Like,
would it have made the job of Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence easier? Is Austin Johnson a comp to Dalvin Tomlinson? Like, that's the question. And I'm not saying I have a conviction on it, because I think it's a fair point to make. But when a guy signs for 2 years at 12 to 15 million, it wasn't a break the bank thing. It wasn't even a long-term deal. And that's just the curiosity. It's like, do you not know what you're going to miss until you confirm it by not having the guy there?
Listen, like I said, I love Dalvin Tomlinson, but the problem isn't stopping the run necessarily right now. Like, I feel like our run defense has been good. Like, the defensive line has been okay. The problem is we're not getting pressure with 3 guys, and Dalvin Tomlinson being here and spending the money on him wouldn't have solved that. And yeah, I think revisionist history is always easy here, where it's like, we're expecting Dalvin Tomlinson to get $12 million over a 4-year deal on the open market, and then as the market starts shrinking for him, the Giants had already made different positions a priority, didn't have the space to re-sign him, and he went elsewhere. So, like, it's tough to look back and all of a sudden say, yeah, like, we totally should have done that. To me, I just think...
Just real quick, by the way, 4 combined tackles for him in week 1 and a QB hit. Maybe the other footnote would be, in Cincinnati, BJ Hill gets 2 sacks with 3 solo and 3 combined tackles, 2 of them for a loss, along with 2 QB hits. Like, maybe that's the bigger name to be talking about, a guy that was on the roster to start the season, and we made the choice. Austin Johnson, Danny Shelton were good, essentially.
Well, the other thing is, listen, I have to be consistent with how I feel about this team. I did not like the Kadarius Toney signing because I thought we should have gone offensive lineman there. So I can't turn around and all of a sudden say, well, I don't see the pass rush. We totally should have taken a pass rusher at 20. It's like, no, I think the offensive line to me was still the priority at that pick after Zeitler left, and we made no free agent acquisitions for anyone over $3 million a year. And the $3 million investment walked out the door in Zach Fulton. So, like, to me, I think in the offseason, I was worried about the offensive line, was thinking we would cobble together something for a pass rush. That clearly has not materialized. Azeez Ojulari got a sack early in the game. That is exciting to see our second-round pick starting to come into his own. Like, happy about that, but we're not getting pressure anywhere else.
Like I like what I'm seeing from Azeez Ojulari, like that little bit of growth, right? I actually like what I've seen from Lorenzo Carter. And this again goes back to Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence, where you're like, and I think if you guys were a bit more effective, those guys would be a bit more effective, right? Like all these things are a byproduct, and it is where I constantly have this war in my head of like, I know championships, I know the Giants' history and everything else, and I go, but the 4-3 it just seems to make more physical sense when you look on the line, and you want to see that front for the New York Football Giants in a lot of ways to give some other opportunities, but. Yeah, we saw some flashes in the game against Washington defensively. It's just not quite there. And I do wonder, right, for whatever he's going to be, but you brought in Roach, right? You drafted Ellerson Smith. He's not there yet. And then maybe the big piece, we mentioned this before, Aaron Robinson getting into that secondary unit. What other looks does that create? And how else does it impact the defense that the Giants want to run? So there are still these caveats to it for sure. Listen, it's a bad loss. It's a division loss. They're 0-2. 10 days from now, they'll take on the Atlanta Falcons. Where are you at? You would call for this team to go 7-10. I have a take on this that I'm willing to. It's going to be the hill that I might die on. I did it with the Brooklyn Nets and the Joe Harris hate. Like I have a sense about this team, but do you feel like this is a team that, let's take the bye week, for example, are they going to be a 2-win team as they enter the bye?
Adam, I did not feel good about this situation. In some of the predictions and projections, I basically said the Week 7 Carolina Panthers game was really going to be the turning point. Mm-hmm. And the Carolina Panthers actually looked pretty good. And that's going to be a really tough matchup for the Giants. But when you look at, 10 days from now, the Giants are taking on the Falcons. They're playing them at home. The Falcons got boat raced by the Eagles in Week 1. It's literally a must-win game for the Giants at this point, right? Like there's no circumstance where them losing the game gives you any confidence that anything good is going to happen this season. But think about the games that go after that Falcons game. It's a must-win because the next game is in New Orleans, and that Saints defense is looking amazing. We got to go at Dallas, where their offense looks like it's going to put up 35 to 40 points a game with how Dak Prescott is playing. And then you get into this whole idea of like the Rams and the Chiefs and the Panthers. It's like, man, if we don't get the win against the Falcons, the Giants could have 2 wins on the season just overall. Like that's how doom and gloom it could get. So this Falcons game is even more important than I think we realized going into it. And we talked earlier, like we kind of just put a check mark on this game. Like, yeah, this is one the Giants are going to win. They have to win this game. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Oh, yeah. And I think, again, like we talked about, we said it a little bit, it was the Broncos game, a must win. And how do you tally those up? Like, listen, the reality is you play 17 games. So it doesn't matter where the wins or losses come. It's just, what is your total at the end of the year? I came dangerously close to saying that I think that this team will be 2-3 as they head into the game against the LA Rams at home after having 2 out of their next 3 games be on the road. You mentioned the Saints, you mentioned the Cowboys. Like, this is what I'm taking away from the way the offense worked, what the offensive line was able to accomplish against a really good defensive front. I came dangerously close to saying that, and I still kind of stand by the idea that when they're coming out of their bye week, like they have 7 games coming up here. I think this is a team that over those 7 games can win a handful of them, maybe get a division one, even the Carolina game. Yes, Sam Darnold looked good. It's against the Jets. I still sit here and say, I have to go a little bit further down the line, that they can be 6-7 through 13 games. Like I still look at it and say that's very much an achievable goal. Obviously, certain things have to get checked here, but I'm going to continue to lean into the idea that this team, more than maybe most teams coming into this year, was going to need a handful of weeks to get certain things ironed out. They're going to have to figure out the offensive lineup. That is a big wrinkle into this operation. But I don't buy into this narrative that this is the same old. And remember, this is a team that started out very bad last year and then came on late, etc. But I still stand by the idea. I think they can be 6-7 through 13 games with those games down the stretch that we talked about, right? The big handful of games that could really matter. And maybe they'll be 5-7 through 12 games and then go from there. But I think they're going to right this ship a little bit more than what some fans are willing to sink them on after last night's game.
Adam, it's simple. Dexter Lawrence jumping off sides or any of those plays that we've mentioned throughout the show.
Yeah, they win the game, Giants are 1-1. Exactly.
They're 1-1, and all of a sudden people are saying we're in the catbird seat to win the division, right? Like that's how fractionally things can change. The Giants put up 29 points in this game against the top 3 defense. Let's actually put that in perspective. All-world, all-pro, soon-to-be Hall of Famer, according to everyone else, about Justin Herbert, only put up 20 points against that team, right? Like, so let's take all this in context here. The offense looked better. They looked far better than they did in week 1. There are tons of encouraging things to take from this game. Yeah. It is not all doom and gloom. People want to make it a big deal about Kenny Gallaudet yelling on the sideline or Darius Slayton dropping a pass. They put up 29 points against the top 3 defense from last year. Like that offense is something that you can say, now that we've adjusted our play calling and we understand what Daniel Jones does well, which is take a couple of deep shots, use his legs, use his athleticism and skill. Like I am encouraged coming out of this game. I know everyone's all doom and gloom. The defense has enough talent to be able to turn this around. I really do think so. Against a team like Atlanta, they better be able to do this because this is a must-win game for the Giants. I don't like saying it this early in the season, but you can't go 0-3 at home against a terrible team. Adam, I am encouraged by what I saw. Week 1 felt like I had no hope. At least I now have hope that the Giants are calling the right plays to put Daniel Jones in the right position. And you saw that he was a great quarterback out there. Like he was. Yeah. And to me, those are all positives. Coming out of Denver, I felt like there was no hope. At least in this game, we did enough to win the game.
Yeah, listen, I said, you take what you get in week 1, you try to confirm or deny some things in week 2, and now I look at those 2 games and I say, now give me the next 2, and let's see, where's the proof in the pudding? Does the offense continue to play consistently like we saw last night, and how do you build on that from there? I'm going to take Sterling Shepard's incredible performances to start this season and put them in my pocket. I'm going to take the 41-yard run by Saquon Barkley as a massive positive in the right direction from week 1 to week 2. Defense needs to figure some things out. Offensive line, I'll be very curious in the weeks ahead how the Giants look at the line and what else they might be willing to do for this season. And on the defensive side, will they look and say, is there something we feel we need to add? Remember, got some bodies on the waiver wire, also have a rookie that hasn't been able to get on the field yet here. So there's some elements that are going to provide some context for this team. So, another couple of weeks, the biggest one is the Atlanta Falcons game. And obviously, were you to lay an egg like you did against the Denver Broncos, it would feel very different the first 3 games of the season and how we feel about them. You can, of course, follow OGP, the One Giant Podcast, not only live on YouTube, in between the podcast episodes, covering snap counts, breaking down Pro Football Focus grades, also on social media at OGP as well. Big shout out, big shout out to Joseph Clark for jumping in on the live stream. Really, I'll go back through, Joseph, take a look at some of what you put up here and see if there's any other juicy nuggets. You touched on a lot of great stuff. We appreciate the support as always. And in the meantime, as Hall of Fame inductee Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.